They wanted her there so people could stare, so they could whisper, so they could measure how far she'd fallen. Derek Cole didn't invite his ex-wife because he missed her. He invited her because he wanted witnesses. But when Maya Cole finally stepped into that room, the laughter didn't land. The smiles froze. And the man who planned the humiliation forgot how to breathe. Because Maya didn't arrive alone. One boy stood on her left, another on her right, both small hands wrapped confidently around hers. And behind her, calm, observant, unmistakable, stood Richard Kingston, the man Derek spent his entire career trying to impress. The boys lifted their heads. Same eyes, same jawline, same quiet certainty. In that moment, Derek realized something far too late. The woman he thought he erased had been building a life he was never meant to enter. Take a breath. Stay with me. Because this story doesn't begin in that room. It begins with an envelope that was never meant to be opened with dignity. The invitation arrived on a quiet afternoon, tucked neatly among utility bills and grocery coupons. Thick paper. Clean edges. Expensive without trying too hard. Maya almost tossed it aside. Then she saw the name. Maya Cole. Written carefully, formally, like she still belonged to a chapter Derek had already closed. Her fingers hesitated before breaking the seal. Inside was celebration dressed as cruelty. Public event. Carefully chosen audience. And an unspoken message. Come see what replaced you. Maya didn't cry. She didn't shake. She folded the card once, slowly, and set it down as if it were fragile. Not because it could hurt her, but because it revealed how small Derek still was. Later that night, as city lights pressed softly against her window, Maya looked at her reflection. She saw a woman who had been underestimated long enough to become dangerous. Not loud, not vengeful, but unignorable. Her phone buzzed. Short message. Confident. Careless. Hope you'll be there. Maya typed her reply without hesitation. I will. Not because she wanted closure. Not because she wanted revenge. But because some truths don't need defending. They just need to be seen. When Maya first married Derek Cole, their life fit inside a small apartment with thin walls and loud neighbors, but it felt expansive because their hopes were loud enough to drown everything else out. Derek talked about the future the way some men talked about destiny. Certain, ambitious, already half-lived in his mind. Maya listened, believed, and quietly began building the life he described as if it were already theirs. She learned the rhythm of his dreams before she learned her own. Late nights meant coffee reheated twice and legal textbooks spread across the kitchen table. Early mornings meant pressed shirts, whispered encouragement, and the unspoken agreement that her needs could wait. Derek liked to say they were a team. Maya proved it by being the steady ground beneath his momentum. In those years, love looked practical. It sounded like sacrifice disguised as patience. Maya postponed plans, turned down opportunities, told herself there would be time later. After the exams, after the promotion, after the next milestone Derek kept chasing. She didn't resent it. She was proud of him. Proud of how driven he was. Proud of how people listened when he spoke. Sometimes, late at night, he would trace imaginary outlines of their future on her palm. House with wide windows. A life that felt important. A family that would arrive once everything else was secure. Maya nodded and smiled, believing stability was something you earned before you allowed yourself joy. But ambition has a way of leaning heavily on the people closest to it. As Derek climbed, Maya became quieter. Not because she had less to say, but because there was less space to say it. She adjusted without complaint, telling herself this was what partnership looked like. One person pushing forward, the other making sure nothing collapsed behind them. If there were moments of doubt, she buried them beneath optimism. Love, she believed, was built by staying, by holding on, by trusting that effort would be rewarded. She did not yet understand that some dreams grow by consuming the hands that built them. The change didn't arrive all at once. It slipped in quietly, like a draft through a door Maya hadn't realized Derek had left open. His laughter grew shorter. His silences stretched longer. Conversations that once wandered late into the night now ended with distracted nods and a phone face down on the table. At first, Maya told herself it was pressure. New cases, bigger expectations, the weight of becoming someone important. She adjusted the way she always had, listened more, asked for less, made room. When he missed dinner, she saved a plate. When he forgot a promise, she reminded herself that success demanded focus. But love, when it's healthy, doesn't feel like an inconvenience. And slowly that's what she became. Derek stopped looking at her when he spoke. His eyes skimmed past her, already searching for the next thing waiting outside the room. Compliments vanished. Touch became brief, functional. When Maya reached for him, he seemed startled, as if affection required effort he no longer had to give. The nights grew later. The excuses grew cleaner. One evening, Maya brought dinner to his office, hoping to surprise him the way she used to. The building was quiet, lights dimmed for the night. His door was slightly open. She heard his voice first, lighter than it had been in months. Then she heard a woman laugh. Maya stopped. Inside, Derek stood too close to his secretary. His tone low, intimate in a way it hadn't been with Maya for a long time. The woman's hand rested easily on his sleeve, familiar, unafraid. They looked like two people sharing a private understanding. Maya didn't step inside. She didn't interrupt. She backed away slowly, the weight of realization settling heavier than anger ever could. After that, the truth stopped pretending to hide. Messages came in late. His phone never left his hand. When she asked questions, he answered with irritation instead of reassurance. When she expressed hurt, he called it insecurity. "She understands me," he said one night, not unkindly, just honest. "You make everything feel like work." That was when Maya understood. Love hadn't failed them. It had simply stopped being convenient for the man she built her life around. The end came without ceremony. No shouting. No tears loud enough to feel satisfying. Just a conversation that felt more like a transaction than the collapse of a marriage. Derek told her he wanted a divorce on a Tuesday evening. His tone careful, rehearsed. He spoke about growth, about needing something different, about how people change. Maya listened, hands folded in her lap, noticing how calm he sounded, as if he'd been saying the words silently for weeks, maybe months, waiting for the right moment to let them escape. When she told him she was pregnant, the air shifted, but not in the way she'd imagined during all those years of shared plans. He blinked once, processing, then leaned back in his chair. "That complicates things," he said. The words landed hollow. Not cruel enough to argue with. Not kind enough to forgive. 3 months later, papers arrived. Clean. Efficient. Final. Derek moved forward quickly, as if speed might erase the mess he left behind. Mutual friends stopped calling. Invitations stopped coming. Maya's name quietly slipped out of conversations, replaced by silence and assumptions she never corrected. People believed what was easiest. She packed her life into boxes that felt too light for everything she was losing. The apartment emptied. The walls echoed. On her last night there, she sat on the floor and realized no one would notice when she left. That realization hurt more than the divorce itself. To the world, Maya became a footnote. The wife who couldn't keep up. The woman Derek outgrew. She didn't fight the narrative. She didn't defend herself. She disappeared. A new address. A new routine. A life small enough to protect what mattered most. She learned how to move through days without being seen, how to keep her head down, how to carry grief without letting it show. Erasure can feel like failure. But for Maya, it became shelter. Because sometimes, the only way to survive what breaks you is to step far enough away that it can no longer reach you. The hospital room was quiet in a way that felt unreal, as if the world had stepped back to give her space. Rain tapped softly against the window, steady and patient. Maya lay still, exhausted, staring at the ceiling tiles while the weight of everything pressed down at once, what she had lost and what she had chosen to keep. When the nurse returned, her voice was gentle. "They're healthy," she said. "2 boys. The word echoed. Maya turned her head just enough to see them, small and perfect, wrapped in white. Their cries were soft, uncertain, like questions. In that moment, fear tried to rise. But love arrived first, fierce and immediate. She knew what the world would do if it knew. She knew what Derek would do if he found out. She had seen the way he'd closed his heart when responsibility threatened his ambition. She would not offer her children to that indifference. When the paperwork came, Maya hesitated only once. Then she made the choice that would define everything after. The record would say the babies were lost. The truth would live only with her. It wasn't about shame. It was about safety. She named them Ethan and Eli, whispering their names into their hair as if sealing a promise. They would grow without noise, without being claimed by a man who had already chosen himself over them. They would be loved without conditions. A month later, Maya packed a single suitcase. She left before anyone could ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Small apartment, quiet neighborhood, new routines that revolved around feedings, sleepless nights, and the steady rhythm of survival. She learned to exist in halves, one part invisible to the world, the other entirely devoted to the two lives depending on her. Neighbors knew her as polite, private, reliable. No one knew her history. No one needed to. Recognition was a luxury she could no longer afford. Protection was not. As the years passed, Ethan grew careful and observant, always watching. Eli grew bold, quick to laugh, quick to stand in front of his brother. Together, they became her reason and her resolve. Maya didn't tell their story because she wasn't ashamed of it. She kept it quiet because some truths are strongest when they are guarded, not announced. Life did not soften for Maya once she disappeared. Narrowed. Days became measured in practical things. Rent due dates, grocery lists, nap schedules, the quiet arithmetic of making enough stretch far enough. There was no audience for the work she did, no one to praise her endurance. She learned to survive without expecting acknowledgement. The twins filled the small apartment with noise and need. Sleep came in fragments. Some nights she walked slow circles across the living room, one boy in each arm, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed yet. When they finally slept, she stood still for a moment, listening to their breathing, reminding herself that exhaustion meant she was still standing. Maya took whatever work fit around their lives. Remote contracts, temporary shifts, jobs that didn't ask questions or demand explanations. She learned to move through spaces quietly, competent and unnoticed. It was humbling, but it was honest. Every paycheck meant another month of stability, another promise kept. There were moments when loneliness crept in, when she watched other families at the park, when she caught her reflection looking older than she felt. But she did not let bitterness take root. She refused to raise her sons on resentment. Instead, she taught them kindness in small, consistent ways. How to say thank you. How to wait their turn. How to notice when someone else needed help. As the boys grew, so did her strength. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she found better childcare, then steadier work. She learned how to advocate for herself without apology. She began dressing not to disappear, but to feel like herself again. Simple lines, clean edges, a posture that no longer folded inward. No one clapped when she paid off a bill. No one noticed when she stopped flinching at raised voices or unfamiliar streets. Her victories were quiet, personal, deeply earned. Maya did not rebuild her life to prove anyone wrong. She rebuilt it because it was the only way forward. Because dignity, once reclaimed, does not need witnesses. And somewhere between school lunches and bedtime stories, between exhaustion and resolve, she stopped thinking of herself as someone who had been erased. She became a woman who had endured. The meeting happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind Maya had learned not to romanticize. She was working a quiet shift at a modest cafe, moving between tables with practiced ease, when a group of suited men took seats near the window. They spoke in low, measured tones, the language of decisions and leverage. Maya noticed them only because she always noticed everything. One of the men snapped his fingers when his glass was half empty. The sound was sharp, dismissive. Maya paused for half a breath, then refilled the water without comment. When she set the glass down, she met his eyes briefly. Not challengingly, not submissively. Simply present. That moment caught Richard Kingston's attention. He watched the way she carried herself. Upright, composed, unbothered by arrogance. Not trying to impress. Not shrinking either. When the others stepped outside to take a call, Kingston remained seated. "You handled that well," he said. Maya smiled politely. People confuse volume with authority. Kingston studied her more closely then, as if adjusting a lens. "And you don't?" "No," she replied. "I prefer clarity." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, not curiosity. "What's your name?" "Maya." "Just Maya." She nodded. "That's enough." He asked about her background, and she answered carefully but honestly. She had worked in law once. She understood contracts, negotiations, how people behaved when they thought they had power. She spoke without embellishment, without bitterness. When he asked why she was here instead of somewhere more aligned with her skills, she didn't flinch. "Because life required flexibility," she said. "And because my children needed stability." Kingston didn't offer sympathy. He didn't soften his voice or lower his gaze. He simply nodded, as if something important had been confirmed. 2 days later, an email arrived. A meeting request. No explanation. At Kingston's office, Maya wore a simple dress and steady confidence. He didn't ask for her story again. He asked what she could do. And when she answered, the words came clean and sure, sharpened by years of necessity. "I don't invest in potential," Kingston told her when she finished. "I invest in people who've been tested." He didn't offer her rescue. He offered her partnership. For the first time in a long while, Maya wasn't seen as someone who needed help. She was seen as someone who belonged at the table. Maya didn't rise quickly. She rose correctly. The work Richard Kingston offered her was demanding, deliberate, and built on trust rather than noise. She advised small firms first, businesses that had been overlooked or quietly misled. She translated complexity into clarity, conflict into structure. People listened because she didn't posture. She prepared. She followed through. Results came the way they always do when integrity compounds, steadily then unmistakably. Kingston watched without hovering. He expanded her responsibilities when she proved ready, not when she asked. With each successful negotiation, each dispute resolved without spectacle, her influence widened. Contracts passed through her review. Decisions paused until she weighed in. Her name appeared on documents that mattered. She never announced her progress. She didn't need to. What she didn't realize at first was how close her new world sat beside Derek's old one. The law firm Derek worked at was part of Kingston's larger network, one of several ventures feeding into a carefully managed ecosystem. Maya's role touched the edges of it, then slowly moved inward. She saw familiar names in reports, heard familiar patterns in complaints. Ambition without accountability. Performance without loyalty. Derek's name surfaced occasionally, not in praise, in questions. Kingston would pause during reviews, tapping his pen thoughtfully. "How does he treat support staff?" he'd ask. "Does he keep his word when there's nothing to gain?" Those questions mattered. And they stalled things. Derek felt it before he understood it. Promotions delayed. Conversations cut short. Doors that should have opened stayed closed. He worked harder, spoke louder, polished his image, but something invisible resisted him. Maya never interfered directly. She didn't have to. Power, she learned, wasn't about control. It was about positioning. About being the quiet constant others relied on when decisions became complicated. Home, nothing changed. She still packed lunches. Still listened to Ethan's careful questions and Eli's bold declarations. Still read bedtime stories and kissed foreheads goodnight. Her life remained grounded, deliberately ordinary. She didn't tell her sons about the influence she carried. She didn't need them growing up believing power was something to chase. What mattered was this: the world Derek navigated every day was quietly shaped by standards he could no longer meet. And the woman he believed he'd erased had become part of the foundation holding it together. Maya never asked for authority. But when it arrived, she carried it the same way she carried everything else, with restraint, purpose, and no need to be seen. Derek chose the venue carefully. Bright enough to feel celebratory. Exclusive enough to feel important. He wanted the room full: colleagues, friends, people whose opinions carried weight. This wasn't just a gathering. It was a performance. He moved through the preparations with practiced confidence, greeting vendors by name, correcting details with a smile that never reached his eyes. Alana hovered nearby, radiant and eager, her hand resting on her stomach like proof of progress. Derek liked the way people looked at them together. Admiration. Envy. Validation. When someone asked if Maya would come, he laughed lightly, as if the idea were amusing rather than calculated. "I sent the invitation," he said. It felt appropriate. Appropriate meant deliberate. Meant controlled. He imagined her arrival clearly. Lone. Careful. Slightly hesitant. He pictured the quiet murmurs, the sideways glances, the satisfaction of being seen as the man who had moved on while she remained behind. He told himself it wasn't cruelty. It was closure. Proof that he'd chosen correctly. In the days leading up to the event, Derek's confidence sharpened. This was his world now. His success. His future on display. The past had no power here. The room filled quickly on the afternoon of the celebration. Laughter rose. Glasses clinked. Derek stood near the entrance, greeting guests like a host who believed he belonged at the center of every story. Each new arrival reinforced the narrative he'd built so carefully. Then the doors opened again. Derek barely looked up at first. He was mid-conversation, mid-smile, mid-certainty. But something shifted in the air, an interruption he hadn't planned for. The voices near the entrance fell quiet. Maya stepped inside. She didn't hesitate. She didn't search the room. She walked forward with steady purpose, dressed simply, composed in a way that made the space adjust around her. On either side of her were two boys, their hands held easily in hers, their presence calm and assured. And just behind her, unmistakable in posture and bearing, was Richard Kingston. The room seemed to inhale all at once. Derek's smile faltered, confusion flickering before recognition could catch up. He felt the performance slip through his fingers, the moment turning in a direction he had never considered. The stage was set. It just wasn't set for him. The silence spread faster than any whisper could. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Derek stood frozen, the smile he'd practiced faltering as recognition tried to find footing. Maya stopped a few steps inside the room. Not to announce herself, just to arrive. Richard Kingston moved beside her with the ease of someone who never needed permission to be present. He greeted a few familiar faces with a nod, his attention calm, observant. When his gaze landed on Derek, it held, not accusatory, not surprised, simply aware. Derek felt it then, the ground shifting beneath the narrative he'd rehearsed. Kingston's presence alone rewrote the room. The man Derek had spent years impressing now stood quietly aligned with the woman he'd tried to diminish. And then there were the boys. They looked up at the room with the uncomplicated curiosity of children, unbothered by tension they didn't need to understand. Ethan's grip on Maya's hand was steady, protective in his own careful way. Eli leaned slightly forward, eyes bright, already reading faces, already sensing where he belonged. Someone stared too long. Another leaned closer. The resemblance didn't need explanation. Spoke for itself. Derek's breath caught. He saw it, the familiar set of the jaw, the shape of the eyes he recognized from mirrors and old photographs. A truth he had never prepared for settled in his chest, heavy and undeniable. Maya didn't look at him. Not yet. She bent slightly, smoothing Eli's sleeve, a small, tender gesture that grounded the moment in something real. Then she straightened, her posture easy, her expression composed. Kingston spoke first, his voice low but carrying. "Maya," he said, with the quiet respect of someone acknowledging a peer. "I'm glad you could make it." The room absorbed that single sentence. Not an introduction. Confirmation. Maya finally lifted her eyes to Derek. There was no triumph in her gaze. No accusation. Only clarity. This was who she was now. Not the woman he left behind. Not the story he told when it suited him. A mother. Professional. A presence that didn't need permission. The truth stood there, breathing, unhidden. And Derek understood, too late, that humiliation had never been her destination. It had been his.